The Guardian's Awakening. Break the Cycle and Conquer Suffering. Introduction. The Divide. There are two kinds of people who will pick up this book. The first will skim it, nod at a few ideas, maybe even agree with some points. They'll put it down unchanged. Their delusions will remain intact, their suffering still there. They will continue waiting for life to change on its own, believing that healing happens passively, that time alone will somehow erase their pain. The second will not simply read this book, they will experience it. They will feel something shift inside them as they move through these pages. They will come face to face with uncomfortable truths, confront the weight of their own suffering, and realize that healing is not something that happens to them. It is something they must fight for. Prepare for war. This book is not here to soothe you. It is not here to validate your suffering or tell you that time will magically fix everything. Healing is not passive. It is not a waiting game. It is an active battle against every false belief you have ever clung to, every comforting lie you have ever told yourself, every delusion that has kept you shackled in confusion. The sickness does not fade on its own. It must be eradicated. To truly heal, you must be willing to let go of everything you currently believe. You must allow yourself to be wrong. You must destroy the false narratives that have kept you trapped in suffering and replace them with clarity. This process is not comfortable. It is not easy. That is why most people avoid it, until rock bottom forces them to face what they spent their entire lives avoiding. Deeply encoded within our DNA is a survival instinct that compels us to fear the unknown. But after reading this book, the unknown will fear you. If you are truly ready to heal, sharpen your mind and strengthen your resolve, because this is war. This is not an exaggeration. It is a war against your own mind, against the protective mechanisms that have shielded you from facing the truth about suffering and evil. And you must override them, or you will continue to be controlled by them. This book's message isn't what you want to hear. It's what you need to hear. It is the only way. But you are not being thrown into the fire without a way out. I will not abandon you. I am here to pull you from the depths. Every word is a hand reaching for you, a shield I place between you and the suffering that has ruled your life for too long. You are not alone in this battle. I am here with you. Every step, every fight. You may stumble. You may want to turn back. But if you take my hand and refuse to let go, I promise, you will be reborn. Part 1. The Components of Suffering. Chapter 1. Well-being. The Soul. A different perspective. For centuries, people have spoken about the soul as if it were something separate from the body, something pure that could be stained, saved, or lost. Religion built entire frameworks around the idea that the soul determines a person's worth and ultimate fate. But strip away the mystical language, and what remains is something far more tangible: your well-being. What many called the soul was an early attempt to explain what we now recognize as mental and emotional health. The weight of guilt, the relief of forgiveness, the feeling of being whole or broken. These were never spiritual forces at work. They were psychological experiences. People weren't battling for their souls. They were battling for their sanity. Well-being is not some abstract luxury, nor is it simply the absence of pain. It is the foundation of a functional, thriving existence. It determines whether a person feels stable or lost, strong or weak, fulfilled or empty. And when well-being is compromised, whether through trauma, neglect, or self-deception, the result is always suffering. Many never make the connection between suffering and the loss of well-being. They accept their misery as fate, something unavoidable, something inherent to life. But suffering is not random. It does not appear without cause. It is always the result of something being taken, ignored, or abused. When people fail to see this connection, they remain stuck. They wait for relief to come from outside sources, from time, or from others. But time alone does not heal. Action does. Healing is not passive. It does not come from wishful thinking or waiting for pain to fade on its own. It comes from a direct, deliberate confrontation with suffering itself. Without well-being, you lose everything. And most don't even realize when it's gone. Defend your well-being or lose it. To protect well-being is to protect life itself. To allow it to be violated is to invite suffering. There is no neutral ground. A person is either fighting for their well-being or sinning against it. Religious doctrine often describes sin as an act of moral failure, something that offends God. Through the lens of psychology, sin isn't breaking divine laws. It's allowing yourself to be abused. It's anything that destroys life, your own or someone else's. Every time a person neglects their well-being, allows abuse, or refuses to confront their suffering, they are committing the only sin that truly matters, the sin against life. But for many, the battle was lost long before they ever realized it began. When well-being is destroyed, when suffering takes over, a person falls into a state of separation. They become lost in delusion, rage, or despair, cut off from the truth, cut off from reality, cut off from what they may call God. Not a deity but all life, including their own. To ostracize yourself, to separate yourself from the very species upon which you depend for survival, safety, and emotional well-being, is where true suffering lies. Action items. Understanding your own well-being. 1. Recall a recent uncomfortable interaction. Close your eyes and bring up a recent memory where you felt deeply uncomfortable, anxious, or hurt during an interaction with someone else. Notice the moment clearly in your mind, paying attention to what was said, your physical sensations, and your emotional responses. 2. Identify the feeling in your chest. As you replay this memory, pinpoint exactly where you feel tension or anxiety. Is it a tightness, heaviness, or sinking sensation? Place your hand there and acknowledge this feeling consciously. Recognize that this feeling is your body's way of signaling unresolved emotional pain or distress. 3. Ask yourself these questions. What specifically caused me to feel anxious or upset during this interaction? Have I felt this specific feeling before in similar situations? If yes, try to recall an earlier memory where you felt this exact same sensation. 4. Write it out clearly. Take a moment and write down exactly how you felt, why you believe you reacted this way. Write down 3 different ways you could have guided this situation toward a more positive outcome. 5. Reflect on patterns. Look for recurring themes in your reactions. Do you often feel misunderstood, attacked, or helpless? Recognize these patterns as signals that something deeper within you, likely unresolved trauma, is driving your reactions. 6. Acknowledge your hidden suffering. Many people underestimate how deeply they're suffering. Take a moment to acknowledge the weight of these experiences. Admit clearly to yourself, I have been suffering deeply. My anxiety and pain is real and deserves my attention and healing at all times. 7. Make a promise to yourself. Write a brief personal commitment in your own words, such as, I choose to confront my feelings honestly, no matter how uncomfortable they are. I will not dismiss my anxiety as normal or unavoidable or minimize my suffering anymore. I will seek to understand myself fully. Repeat this exercise frequently, as self-awareness and acknowledgement are critical first steps toward lasting healing. Chapter 2. Trauma, Confusion. When trauma forces delusion over reality. When you are whole, you learn from pain. If you make a mistake, you face the consequences, adjust your behavior, and grow. This is the foundation of maturity. But trauma disrupts this natural process. It separates your perception from objective reality. Instead of seeing mistakes in their true, unfiltered form, your traumatized mind distorts the truth to protect you from guilt, shame, or fear. Instead of acknowledging, I caused this suffering, you find yourself asking, why do these things keep happening to me? It is because you are avoiding accountability for your own behavior in your own suffering. When you cling to delusions, blame external factors, and refuse responsibility for your suffering, you unknowingly continue to abuse yourself, never recognizing the real source of your pain. You repeat destructive behaviors while remaining blind to their true consequences. This confusion escalates into overwhelming hopelessness and despair. The cycle repeats endlessly, plunging you deeper into misery and mental illness. Each repetition reinforces the very delusions that trapped you as you externalize blame, until you no longer understand how you got there or how to escape. Desperation. When pain becomes dangerous, the feeling of being trapped inside suffering, with no way out, turns mere confusion into life-threatening desperation. Driven by a primal fear to lower anxiety and restore well-being, People grasp at anything: validation, addiction, toxic relationships, perversion, and even murder. They chase relief in ways that seem irrational or destructive to outside observers, yet appear entirely necessary from within their distorted perception. A person trapped in the trauma cycle rejects help, lashes out at those who offer assistance, and sees threats where none exist. They perceive the very people who care about them, the ones genuinely trying to help, as enemies attempting to rob them of what little comfort they can still cling to. Ultimately, desperation leads to self-destruction, the creation of new abusers, and even criminal acts. Narcissism. When self-love becomes mental illness, narcissism is not genuine self-love or confidence. It's desperation driven by unresolved pain. When the suffering of past experiences becomes overwhelming, the mind instinctively shifts into survival mode. It creates an exaggerated self-image, a delusion of inflated importance designed to shield you from unbearable feelings of insignificance, shame, and helplessness. This distortion of self-worth is a primal defense mechanism. Desperation compels you to control how others perceive you, turning relationships into transactions and interactions into performances. Driven by a deep fear of being invisible or unworthy, you endlessly chase reassurance, praise, and acknowledgement, building a fragile illusion of stability. But the tragic irony is that narcissism prevents real connection. By obsessively prioritizing your own needs and not providing a calm atmosphere, you unknowingly push others away, deepening ostracization and reinforcing the very fears that created your narcissism. This is why narcissism thrives in confusion. Without clarity, you remain blind to the harm you inflict on yourself and others. You repeat destructive patterns, unable to escape the prison of distorted perception, a prison you built yourself, driven by desperation for safety. Do you care about me? The narcissist's blind spot. A narcissist does not lack love, they misunderstand it. To them, love is a transaction. If you meet their needs, you are cherished. If you fail them, you are discarded. Yet they see themselves as selfless, generous, and endlessly giving. They do favors, offer help, and try to please everyone, believing this proves their goodness. But their kindness is just another form of selfishness, a way to control how others perceive them, not a genuine act of care for others' well-being. Ask a narcissist if they care about you, and they will say yes without hesitation. But ask them, do you care enough to think before you speak? Do you care enough to recognize when you're making me feel bad about myself? And suddenly the answer is not so clear. Not because they don't want to care, but because true care requires self-awareness, and narcissism is blindness to anything beyond self. They don't realize that genuine well-being exists, so they can't comprehend that we have it too, or that we're protecting ours from them. If their first instinct is to defend themselves rather than acknowledge your pain, you are not dealing with love. You are dealing with narcissism. This is what selfishness truly means, not just prioritizing yourself, but being so absorbed in your own needs and suffering that you are blind to the harm you cause yourself and others. And this is why empathy is the cure to narcissism. It forces you to see reality beyond your own perception. It demands that you acknowledge not just what you feel, but how you make others feel. And once you truly understand that, the delusions about your own kindness and the harm you inflict become impossible to maintain. Are you brave enough to see yourself clearly? Action items. Challenging your narcissistic tendencies. 1. Notice defensiveness. Reflect in a recent situation where someone criticized you or disagreed with you. How did you react? Did you listen, or did you immediately defend yourself? 2. Examine intentions. Think about a recent favor or kind act you performed. Were you expecting something in return, such as validation or praise? Or was your kindness genuinely selfless? 3. Observe conversations. Next time you're talking to someone, notice whether you're truly listening or just waiting to speak. Challenge yourself to genuinely hear and acknowledge their feelings before responding. 4. Practice humility. Make a conscious effort today to acknowledge someone else's viewpoint openly, even if it contradicts yours. Simply notice how this feels. These simple exercises are designed to gently challenge any narcissistic tendencies you might have by encouraging self-awareness and genuine reflection. Chapter 3. Forgiveness, how trauma creates abusers. No one is born a monster. Every act of cruelty, every manipulation, every attempt to control or harm others is rooted in an unhealed pain that was once inflicted upon someone. An abuser is not someone who simply chooses to be evil. They are someone who never broke free from their own suffering. They were once a child, just as vulnerable, just as desperate for love, just as capable of being hurt. But they never found their way out. They never developed the self-awareness to break free from the delusions that justified their suffering. They remained trapped in the cycle and became part of it. This does not excuse their actions. But if you refuse to understand them, if you continue to see them as nothing more than monsters, then you are ensuring that their suffering will live on, not just in them but in you. Satan, the gatekeeper of hell. Hell is not fire and demons. It is a prison of the mind, built by those who refuse to let go of pain. It is not inflicted by a supernatural force. It is maintained by the people trapped inside it. People think of hell as a punishment for wrongdoing. But in reality, it is the natural negative consequence of living in delusion, unwilling to heal. True healing is about ending the cycle and not prolonging it. A person who refuses to understand the source of their abuser's pain, who defines themselves by their suffering, who believes their pain justifies their bitterness, is not escaping abuse, they are sustaining it. And in doing so, they don't just remain in hell, they become its gatekeeper. In religious context, Satan is the embodiment of unforgiveness, forever trapped in resentment. By refusing to forgive, you are not punishing your abuser, you are imprisoning yourself. You become Satan. Forgiveness does not mean approval. One of the greatest misunderstandings about forgiveness is the belief that to forgive someone is to excuse their actions. This is false. Forgiveness does not mean excusing the suffering inflicted or pretending it was justified. True forgiveness happens when you recognize the reality of what happened while refusing to let it control your emotions any longer. It is the decision to no longer let the past dictate your future, to no longer let someone else's cruelty define who you are. When someone is hurt, betrayed, or abused, their first instinct is to hold on to their suffering. They believe their pain is proof of what happened, that releasing it would be the same as saying it was acceptable. They believe justice requires holding on to anger, onto resentment, onto the idea that the person who hurt them must suffer exactly as they have before they can ever find peace. Revenge the only cure. But justice without redemption isn't justice. It's just vengeance disguised as righteousness. The only path to ending the cycle. Trauma creates abusers. Abusers create more trauma. The cycle repeats endlessly because everyone believes their pain is insurmountable, their suffering unique, their wounds justification for their own cruelty. But if no one breaks the cycle, then the cycle never ends. Forgiveness is the only weapon strong enough to destroy the sickness. It means recognizing that the person who hurt you was once just as lost as you were. It means understanding that if you refuse to heal, you will pass your pain on to someone else. It means acknowledging that your abuser did not invent their cruelty, they inherited it. Forgiveness is not surrender. It is understanding. By forgiving them, you don't just stop the cycle, you cure it before it spreads. Turn the other cheek was never a command to be weak, nor was it a call for submission. It was a rejection of the cycle of suffering, a refusal to engage in the endless back and forth of revenge. It meant standing firm in the face of cruelty, refusing to let pain transform you into the very thing that hurt you. True strength is not in striking your abuser back, it is in smashing the will entirely. Part 2. Rebuilding Yourself. Chapter 4. Empathy Training, Breaking the Cycle. Why empathy is the key to healing. Most people resist empathy because it is uncomfortable. It forces you to see beyond yourself, beyond your suffering, and recognize how you've affected others. It is far easier to remain in victimhood. When you are a victim, you are pitted. You are absolved of responsibility. You receive comfort without needing to change. But the relief is temporary, and the cost is your freedom. True healing requires stepping outside yourself. Trauma traps people in the past, making them react to delusions instead of reality. Every interaction feels like a battle. Every word seems like a threat. Every situation is filtered through fear and pain. Empathy cuts through these distortions. It lets you yourself and others as they are, not as your trauma distorts them to be. When you develop empathy, you stop assuming the worst in others. You stop treating every situation as an attack. You become conscious of your words, your tone, your presence. Instead of pushing people away with defensiveness, you become someone others trust and want to connect with. This is how you control the abuse you allow and reclaim your well-being. When you treat people with care, they respond in kind. Not everyone will, but you will understand why. Empathy still breaks the cycle by reducing the negative experiences that reinforce suffering. As you learn to shield yourself from abuse, suffering loses its grip, and so do anxiety, depression, and fear. Healing is not possible without empathy. Most people believe they are self-aware, but if they can't see past their own pain, they remain controlled by it. True healing begins when you shift your focus from suffering to understanding. This is how you rebuild, not through power, control, or revenge, but through clarity, connection, and awareness. The three perspectives of empathy. Unlocking the Holy Trinity. Empathy is not about performative kindness. It is about perception, the ability to see reality from multiple angles instead of being trapped in a single self-centered perspective. The deeper your empathy, the more truth you can access. This is where most people fail. They assume empathy is just feeling for someone else, or being overly emotional. But true empathy is a skill, one that must be developed like a muscle. And at its highest form, it unlocks three distinct perspectives of awareness, what religion has long misunderstood as the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. First perspective, the Son, the narcissistic perspective. This is the most primitive and egocentric layer of perception, the perspective of a child, someone who has not yet developed the ability to see beyond themselves. At this stage, you experience the world only through your own eyes. You hear your own words as you speak them, you feel your own emotions, and you react impulsively. This is where narcissism, victimhood, and delusion are born, because a person trapped in this perspective assumes their reality is the true reality. This is the Son, the suffering child who has not yet learned wisdom. It is the perception of immaturity, emotional blindness, and self-absorption. This is where all people begin, but where most remain, unless they choose to grow. Second perspective, the Father, the empathy perspective. With developed empathy, a person reaches the second layer of perception. Here, you are no longer trapped inside your own mind. You can mentally step into another person's experience. You hear your own words as they hear them. You become aware of how your presence, tone, and energy affect others. At this stage, you recognize that your emotions are not the only emotions that exist. This is the Father, the perspective of wisdom and guidance. It is the shift from self-absorption to responsibility, where one learns not only to perceive others, but to act with awareness of everyone's well-being. This is the foundation of emotional intelligence, the ability to understand how your existence shapes the world around you. Third perspective, the Holy Spirit, the observer perspective. The highest level of perception is the ability to step outside the situation entirely and view it objectively, free from delusion. Imagine watching yourself and another person interact from a distance, as if you were observing a scene in a movie. From this detached vantage point, you can see both your emotions and theirs simultaneously. You recognize misunderstandings in real time, course correct before conflicts escalate, and guide interactions toward clarity and resolution. This is the Holy Spirit, the unifying force, the perception beyond the self, beyond just understanding others, into a full awareness of how reality itself unfolds. This is where wisdom, clarity, and true mastery of life are found. Master all three perspectives, and you hold the Holy Grail. This is how you transcend suffering. This is how you reclaim your well-being. This is how you find your place in heaven. The barriers to higher perception. The second and third perspectives remain locked to those who choose delusion over truth. Those who refuse to move beyond the sun remain prisoners of their own emotions, mistaking their personal experience for objective reality. Without developing the Father, the perspective of responsibility and wisdom, they will never break free from self-centered perception. And without accessing the Holy Spirit, the observer perspective, They will always be slaves to their impulses, unable to step back, detach, and see the full picture. The Holy Trinity was never about an external God. It was always a blueprint for the mind, a map showing the path from suffering to wisdom. And now you have the tools to dismantle the source of suffering, Satan itself. Action items. Strengthening your empathy muscles. 1. Identify a defensive moment. Think about a recent conversation or interaction where you reacted defensively or felt attacked. Clearly write down your immediate thoughts and emotions during that moment. 2. Practice empathy. Now re-experience that interaction from the other person's perspective. Write down how you imagine they interpreted your words, your tone, and your behavior. List the emotions you think they felt during the interaction. 3. Observe as a neutral party. Imagine you are watching this same interaction as an impartial observer. Note what emotional triggers or misunderstandings you can see from this neutral vantage point. Write down at least one action each person could have taken to de-escalate the situation. 4. Recognize your empathy barriers. Clearly identify which emotions or personal insecurities prevented you from naturally accessing empathy during this interaction. Write down one concrete step you can take to actively overcome this barrier in future situations. 5. Take immediate action. Today, choose one small action that challenges your usual pattern of defensiveness, perhaps initiating a sincere conversation, offering a genuine apology, or simply observing your reaction without responding impulsively. Afterward, briefly reflect in writing how this action affected your emotional state and the outcome of the situation. Chapter 5. Hunting Satan. The War Against Self-Destruction. The Enemy Within. No prison is stronger than the one you build for yourself. At first, you don't even see the walls. People spend years blaming their circumstances, their past, or the world itself for their suffering. They convince themselves that if they could just fix some external problem, make more money, find the right relationship, earn the respect they deserve, then everything would finally find peace. But eventually, if they are paying attention, they start to see the pattern. No matter what changes, the suffering remains. It follows them from job to job, from relationship to relationship, from one phase of life to the next. The same problems keep appearing. The same pain keeps repeating. The same self-sabotage keeps happening. And then, they must face the truth. The warden of your prison is not the world, not fate, not even your past. Satan is you. Every destructive behavior, every irrational fear, every toxic relationship is a reflection of your own mind working against you. You are the one making the decisions that lead to your suffering. You are the one clinging to the delusions that keep you trapped. You are the one refusing to confront the reality of who you are and what you have become. And if you ever want to be free, you must hunt Satan down and banish it. Satan thrives in chaos, confusion, and darkness. The more unaware you are of your programming, the more it controls you. If you want to defeat suffering, you must force it into the light and examine it, understand it, and understand why it happened. But knowing you are programmed is not enough. Understanding why you suffer does not stop the suffering. Breaking free requires action, deliberate, calculated action. The roller coaster analogy. Facing fear head-on. Imagine you are terrified of roller coasters. Every time you hear the clatter of the tracks and the screams of the riders, a surge of anxiety grips you. You avoid amusement parks, decline invitations from friends, and convince yourself that you're simply not a roller coaster person. But deep down, you know the fear is irrational. You know the coaster won't hurt you. You know the danger is just another delusion the fear of uncertainty has caused you to build. At some point, you make the choice to stop running. You go to the park. You step into line. Your heart pounds, your hands shake, but you do not waver. The moment you strap yourself in and hear the click of the seatbelt, you equip your shield and draw your sword. This is it. The exorcism is about to begin. It's good to see you again, Satan. I've missed you. As the ride begins its slow ascent, adrenaline surges through. Your heart beats like the drums of war. You scream, not in terror but in defiance. This is your war cry. Satan tries to bargain with you one last time, whispering lies, urging you to retreat, but it's too late. The time for negotiation is over. You will taste victory once again. And it will be thrilling. You refuse to let fear break you. You do not escape. You do not resist. You let go. You surrender to the moment and let it take you. And then something unexpected happens. You begin to have fun. Instead of dying, instead of breaking, instead of being consumed by terror, you are simply there experiencing it. The rush, the weightlessness, the speed, it isn't suffering. It's exhilarating. It's freedom. You throw your hands in the air, not because you have to, but because you can. And in that moment you understand, Satan never had power. You were the one holding the leash the entire time. This is what it means to hunt Satan. Victory isn't given. It's taken. And it's already yours if you're brave enough to grab it. Action items. Confronting and overcoming your irrational fears. 1. Identify your fear clearly. Write down a fear you've been avoiding, something you've left unexplored or unresolved because it feels overwhelming or frightening. 2. Understand your fear. List specifically what scares you about confronting this fear. Is it rejection, embarrassment, failure, or something else? Clearly state what negative outcomes you imagine could happen. 3. Feel the unknown. Recognize and note how your anxiety grows the longer you leave this fear in the unknown. Reflect on past experiences where anxiety lessened once something unknown became known. 4. Take one small step. Determine one simple, concrete action you can take today toward facing this fear, like initiating a conversation, researching the topic, or taking a first step to address it. 5. Observe the reality. After taking action, immediately record what actually happened. Compare this with what you imagined would happen. Note any differences. 6. Repeat and expand. Tomorrow, choose another small step toward fully confronting this fear. Each day, expand your comfort zone a little more until the fear no longer feels unknown or overwhelming. 7. Reflect on your progress. After a week of consistently taking small actions, reflect on how your perception of the fear has changed. Record how confronting your fear directly has reduced anxiety and increased clarity. Chapter 6. A Real Exorcism. Facing the Abyss and Slaying the Shadow. The Descent into the Void. Surrender it all. Every false belief, every soothing lie, every illusion. You must release it all. Lift your anchor, and let the current of the universe pull you into the unknown. And in doing so, you must face reality, no matter how painful, no matter how monstrous the truth may be. And so, with nothing left to lose, you let go. I can't live like this anymore. Something is killing me. Why do I suffer so badly? I can't stop the pain. I can't kill it until I know what I'm fighting. And as soon as I do, I will bring the fury of hell with me and put an end to all suffering in a blaze of glory. God, Satan, show yourself. Reveal yourself to me now. I command you. The moment you dare to threaten God, something shifts. The air thickens. The abyss stirs. Your brain now understands. You are ready. Ask and you shall receive. Your exorcism has begun. The birth of the vision. When consciousness returns, you are somewhere else. Not a place but a state of being, a void infinite and empty yet familiar. There is no sound, no time, no weight. You float in nothingness, yet feel perfectly at peace. For the first time in your life, there is no fear, no struggle, no pain. The silence wraps around you like a warm embrace. And then you see it. A child. Distant, barely visible against the void. You don't know how long they've been there, perhaps they were always there. But now, your mind is overwhelmed with curiosity. Something about them pulls at you, demanding your attention. As you focus, the child moves closer, not by walking, but as if space itself shifts to bring them near. The experience is so vivid you feel as though you could reach out and touch them. And then they turn, and you see their face. I know this child. From somewhere. But I can't remember. Why are you scared? I don't understand. Their eyes are squeezed shut. Their face twisted in silent terror. Far too heavy for someone so small. And then you see why. A shifting black mass clings to their shoulder, writhing and pulsing like a living parasite. It draws your focus until your attention is entirely consumed by it. The weight of the child's suffering seeps into you, growing heavier, darker, consuming every part of your being. The pain intensifies, expanding beyond your control. It spreads through your chest, your limbs, stealing the oxygen from your lungs. This is not just pain. This is deep despair. A force so powerful, so absolute, it crushes the will to live beneath it. Satan is here. And for the first time, you feel the full force of its merciless grip tightening around your soul. You begin to bargain, convincing yourself that you are in no way prepared to face this. You tell yourself to run, but there is nowhere to go. The sensation grows, overtaking everything, swallowing you whole. You didn't cause this pain, but it doesn't matter anymore. It belongs to you now. The parasite has taken root inside you. Its corruption spreads, seeping into your very being. What is happening to me? I don't understand. Your own voice, warped with terror, echoes into the void. Please, don't do this to me. Desperate for help, you lunge at the child, clawing and screaming, begging them to help you. But they don't move. They don't respond. Still paralyzed by fear. By something that is here. What is attacking me? Where are you? Stay away. I can't see it in this darkness. I'm blinded. What did you do to me? And then, the realization slams into you like a tidal wave. I feel what they feel. No, I don't want this. Oh God, no. Your knees buckle. Your breath is stolen. The truth erupts through your mind like an explosion. I know this face. I know this child. But I can't know. I don't want to remember. But the truth doesn't care what I want. I remember now. This child is me. The shattering of delusion, panic surges through you. The more you claw at the child out of fear, out of anger, out of pain, the more terror you both have to endure. And then with devastating clarity, you understand. You are not looking at them. You are looking into yourself. Their eyes are squeezed shut. Not because they are blind, but because they are too afraid to see. And so are you. For years, you chose to close your eyes. You abandoned this child in the darkness, leaving them to suffer alone. The pain, the fear, the loneliness, it was never theirs to bear. It was always yours. You left it here for them. You locked them inside a prison of endless suffering, while you ran. The weight of this truth is suffocating. You were not possessed. You were not cursed. You were never fighting an external force. You were wrestling your own reflection. And the longer you refused to see it, the stronger it became. And the only way to free the child, the only way to save yourself, is to finally open your eyes. The void quakes as you command yourself to wake up. This is it. Your rebirth into adulthood. Open your eyes now. Your childhood delusions shatter. For the first time, you see your trauma in its entirety. The warrior's rebirth. The darkness is absolute. The black mass around you is thick and suffocating. Your heart drums war in your ears. You have just seen your past through the eyes of your abuser, felt the cold detachment, the twisted logic, the numb justification. Then, as though the universe had flipped you inside out, you became your child's self, experiencing the trauma all over again, raw and unfiltered, just like when it happened for the first time. And now, you are neither. You are cast out, ripped from your younger self's body and flung backward. You land in the void gasping, weightless, untethered. And when you lift your head, you see it. The scene of your trauma is playing out before you, distant yet vivid, like a stage performance as you sit in the back row, unseen in an empty theater. You are finally outside of it, not trapped inside your child's self, not suffocating in the mind of your abuser, but standing as an observer. And from this safe distance, you see what it truly is. While indefensible, it was criminal child abuse, plain and simple. No more rationalizations. No more excuses. No more delusions. Your empathy and courage have been fully restored. You have completed the Holy Trinity, the third perspective of consciousness, the observer perspective. You feel no confusion now. No doubt. You condemn it as evil. Your judgment is final. Your eyes are drawn back to the child. The black mass still clings, the parasite, the trauma. The thing that has loomed over you your entire life, suffocating you, controlling you, making all your decisions for you. It pulses, massive and all-consuming. You reach toward it, and as your fingers graze its surface, you realize when you acknowledge it, what it truly is. You have power over it. You can shrink it. You can control it. The moment you will it smaller, the child responds. You look down and see them, your younger self, trembling wide-eyed. A shaky sigh of relief escapes them. When the trauma looms large, they panic, their breath ragged, limbs tense, eyes pleading for escape. But as you shrink it, diminishing the weight of the pain, they begin to relax. The fear fades. The grip of the past loosens. You realize now, the suffering was never a monster outside of you. It was a shadow, one you had given shape, size, and power. And if you can master it, it no longer has the ability to master you. The weight lifts. You step forward and kneel before your younger self, now smiling, full of life, reaching out a hand. Their tiny fingers hesitate before taking yours. And then you pull them in. You embrace them, holding them warmly and deeply. For the first time, you give them the compassion they so desperately needed on that fateful night. The child is drawn into you, their small form dissolving into light as they merge with your chest. A warmth spreads through you, deep and undeniable. For the first time in a long time, you are whole again. You have reclaimed the part of yourself that was lost, frozen in time. Your past no longer owns you. It no longer dictates who you are. The trauma remains. The memories persist. But now you decide their weight. You control their size. At last, you gain what was always out of reach, emotional maturity. You transcend into adulthood. With empathy, maturity, and courage fully restored, your head turns toward the final battle. Electricity surges through you, as if the entire universe itself is fueling your return. The fear that once held you captive is gone. You've never felt stronger. You draw your sword and run boldly into the darkness. God has finally arrived. It is your judgment day. The Guardian's awakening. As soon as your child self merges into you, the darkness around you fractures. In a rage of defiance, you leap into the darkness. Revenge consumes you, burning like eternal flames. You thirst for it, desperate to destroy what made you suffer for so long. Every fiber of your being screams for justice. And you will have it. You are no longer in your own trauma. You are inside your abusers. The scene unfolds before you, suffering, pain, confusion, greater than even your own. And then you see it. Your abuser, trapped in their own torment. The terrified child within them, lost and helpless. The out-of-control adult, lashing out in fear and desperation. The mental illness, the unseen force driving the entire tragedy. And in that moment, you fully understand the cycle of mental illness. You watch as they are broken, as they are abandoned, as they are twisted into something they were never meant to be. You turn and notice the stone bricks surrounding you. The maze reveals itself. Twisting corridors, endless dead ends, every path leading back to suffering. The love they were denied, the warmth they never received, sealed behind locked doors. And now you stand inside it. You watch as the child tries to move, tries to run, but the walls shift with them, trapping them in place. No matter which way they turn, the maze bends, closing off every path. Every corridor leads back to the same pain, the same trauma, the same inescapable suffering, because their mind has decided they are not allowed to leave. They're not ready. Their suffering is not just a memory, it is a prison. And no matter how much time has passed, no matter how much they have tried to forget, they are still trapped within it. No one ever showed them the way out. No one ever gave them a sword. No one ever stood in front of them and said, "No, you don't have to suffer alone anymore. I am here." They did not hurt you because they were evil. They hurt you because they were still ruled by mental illness. Just as you had suffered. Just as you had once been trapped in the cycle of pain, unable to see beyond yourself. They are not free. In your now boundless empathy, you feel the rage inside you begin to fade. It does not mean you excuse what they did. It does not mean you forget. But you can no longer deny the truth. You can no longer build childish delusions. They are suffering immensely, and no one is coming to save them. And no one ever will, unless you do. This is your judgment day. But the judge is not God, it is you. The cycle of suffering stands before you, waiting for your decree. You could condemn your abuser as evil, cast them further into their suffering, ensure that they remain trapped in the same darkness that almost destroyed you, and become the Satan of their hell. Everything inside you screams that they do not deserve mercy. The weight of what they did presses against your chest, tightening like a noose. The anger, the betrayal, the years of pain, they all rise up at once, begging you to strike, to let them suffer as you had. Let Satan win. You tighten your grip on the sword. Your breath is ragged. Everything inside you screams they deserve this. Let them suffer. Let them rot in the same hell they left you in. Your hands shake. The rage burns like acid. You step forward ready to strike. And then movement. In the corner of the maze, something small shifts. A child. Curled up. Not the abuser. The child. You feel it. The one thing more powerful than rage. Understanding. They never escaped their own suffering. They were never saved. And now they stand before you, waiting for their sentence. Your fingers loosen. The sword so heavy now lowers. You will not suffer alone anymore. You lower your sword. It was never a weapon of vengeance, never a force for revenge. With a slow breath, you release your grip. The sword does not clatter to the ground in this endless maze. It slowly dissolves into light. The light does not fade. It rises, spiraling into the air, illuminating the void like the birth of a new galaxy. But it does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes something else, a shield. Instead of retribution, you choose forgiveness. Instead of becoming another link in the chain of suffering, you break it. You don't strike your abuser with your radiant sword. You stand in front of them with a shield made of light, vowing to protect this life with your own. And you know with absolute certainty that this is the moment they have needed all along. Not punishment, not retribution, but for someone to look at them and say, "You are still suffering. I see you. I will not add to your pain. I will not condemn you to the same hell you condemned me to." Instead of striking them down, you step forward, not as a victim, not as an enemy, but as their shield. And in that moment you understand. Angels do not strike down their enemies. They stand before them, shielding them from the storm. Because that is the greatest battle of all. The war against the mental illness itself. A warmth spreads through your chest, unlike anything you've ever felt before. In the physical world, you can feel your brain untwisting at the back. And then, a halo-like sensation, not above your head, but beneath your skin, encircling your skull like a tight puffy headband stretching outward. It's not pressure. It's not pain. It's an intense tingle. The ground trembles beneath you. Cracks splinter through the walls like veins of light breaking through stone. The maze groans, twisting, collapsing in on itself. The chains that bound you to your abuser shatter like brittle glass, fragments dissolving in the wind. The prison they have lived in their entire life, the one they never even knew existed, begins to crumble. Because you are undoing what was done to them. But it is not your abuser's maze that is being destroyed, it's yours. It was always yours. Every wall built brick by brick with your own suffering. Every lock placed by your own fear. Every path leading you back to the same pain. Because you never allowed yourself to leave. The ground splits open beneath your feet, revealing an endless chasm of light. The maze, once an impenetrable fortress, is now flaking like dried paper. The echoes of the past howl in protest, their voices reduced to whispers in the wind. The suffering that built these walls is unraveling, piece by piece, dissolving into dust. And then, like a sandcastle caught in the rising tide, your maze is erased from existence. And for the first time you fully see reality. Because of your empathy, the monster dissolves, and only the lost child remains. And someone you chooses to be their protector. In that moment, you step beyond being a survivor. You become something greater. You become a guardian, not just of yourself, but of all who suffer all of life, God. Because you now see the world as it truly is, not good versus evil, not victim versus abuser, but a cycle of pain that only ends when one person chooses to stop passing it on. And that person is you. This is what it means to be an angel. Not wings, not light, not perfection, but the refusal to let suffering continue. You feel it, not just understanding, not just peace, but strength. The weight of the past does not break you. It lifts you. The pain that once consumed you now fuels something greater. You are no longer trapped inside the suffering that created you. You are no longer just a survivor. You are a guardian. This is the revelation. God is all life, including yourself, including your abuser, including every lost soul who has ever cried out in agony. And if no one else will protect them from suffering, if no one else will guide them toward peace, then you will. This is your duty. This is your war. This is the path of the healed. The cycle ends with you. Not because you hope, not because you wish, but because you demand it. Emerging from the trauma vision, the aftermath of awakening, The moment you return to the physical world, everything is different. Your body is the same, the room is the same, but nothing feels the same. The world no longer has the comfortable filter that once dulled its edges. It is raw, too raw. Every sensation is sharper, every sound louder, every emotion overwhelming. The weight of reality crashes over you, unfiltered and unforgiving. You fully feel your own suffering, without delusion, without denial, without the mental blocks that once kept it at bay. The grief you've buried, the anger you've swallowed, the confusion you've ignored, it all rises at once, like a dam breaking inside you. You might vomit. The nausea hits like a wave, your body purging the toxicity of emotions you were never allowed to process. You might shake uncontrollably. You might sob without restraint, not for minutes but for hours, maybe even days. Or, you might feel nothing at all. A deep, empty stillness, as if your emotions have been drained dry, leaving you staring at the ceiling, unable to move, unable to even think. Somewhere in the chaos, a deep rage may rise. Rage at the people who hurt you, at the life that failed to protect you, at the years stolen by suffering. A fire burns in your chest, demanding justice, demanding answers. You may want to scream, to break something, to set the whole world on fire, just to make it understand what you've been through. But now you know better. All of this is normal. You are not broken, you are healing. The trauma vision has ended, but the process has only begun. Now time itself can actually begin to heal you. Before, time could do nothing, because you were stuck, frozen in the past, repeating the same suffering on an endless loop. But now the cycle has been broken. Your suffering has been dragged into the light. And though it is agonizing, you are finally moving forward. This stage is brutal, but it is sacred. Let yourself feel it all. Let yourself grieve. Let yourself rage. Let yourself grow. No one ever tells you that healing feels like dying first. But this is not death. You are being born. Part 3. The Truth About Consciousness, Chapter 7. The Psychology of Religion and Victimhood. Free will. The choice between suffering and peace. Free will is not the ability to do whatever you want. It is the responsibility of choosing between suffering and peace, over and over again. Every decision is a brick, either building the foundation of your own heaven, or fortifying the walls of your own hell. Most people believe they are good, even as they cause harm. They say, "Of course I care about people." But what they really mean is, "I need people." They mistake their dependency for selflessness, unaware that much of what they do is not for others, but for themselves, to seek validation, to feel useful, to be admired. Selfishness is not simply putting yourself first. It is making choices that harm yourself and others in an attempt to relieve your own internal suffering. Every action has consequences, and when you fail to see the damage you inflict on others, that suffering will inevitably return to you, leaving you lost and confused. People think that when they harm others, they are shifting suffering onto someone else. But suffering infects everything around it. Every cruel word, every act of selfishness, every betrayal returns. Not because of some mystical karma, but because this is the inescapable logic of human behavior. Every lie erodes trust. Every betrayal isolates you. Every manipulation makes your world smaller, lonelier, more desperate, and more paranoid. Free will gives you only two choices: to perpetuate suffering or to break the cycle. And this choice is not made once. It is made in every moment, with every thought, with every action. This is what determines whether you will build heaven within yourself, or remain imprisoned in a hell of your own making. You always have that choice. The Garden of Eden, a metaphor for childhood. Religious myths are not just stories, they are psychological truths buried beneath layers of distortion. The story of the Garden of Eden is no different. People have been told that Adam and Eve's exile was a punishment for disobedience, but this completely misrepresents the real meaning of the story. The Garden of Eden is a metaphor for childhood, a world before someone understands suffering, responsibility, and the true nature of existence. Inside the garden, everything feels safe and predictable, just as a child feels when they are shielded from hardship. There is no death, no betrayal, no harsh truths, just an illusion of security. But then comes the moment of realization. Eating the forbidden fruit is not a sin. It is the irreversible moment of awakening. It is the instant when someone steps out of childhood ignorance and sees reality for what it truly is. They realize pain exists, suffering is real, and safety is an illusion. They recognize the weight of their own actions and the inescapable consequences of choice. Leaving Eden is not a punishment, it is a transformation. It is the transition into adulthood, self-awareness, and the painful but necessary process of seeing life without delusion. Growing up means accepting that suffering is part of reality, and the only way to overcome it is to face it and bite the apple. The search for something greater. At some point in life, every person searches for something greater than themselves. Some call it God. Others call it meaning, purpose, or enlightenment. But beneath the different names, the search is always the same, a desperate attempt to make sense of existence. From the moment we are born, we are surrounded by uncertainty. We do not choose to be here, yet we are thrown into a world that demands we survive. We are given no explanations, only experiences. And for a lot of people, especially trauma survivors, this is unbearable. The human mind craves certainty. It needs structure, a framework to understand suffering, to justify struggle, to make sense of chaos. When no clear answers present themselves, people create them. But God is not a supernatural being, just like heaven isn't a place. God is a psychological placeholder for whatever a person worships. It is the thing they believe will give their life meaning, order, and purpose. It is what they would harm themselves, harm others, or die to protect. This isn't always a creator God inside a religion. The only God that cannot be destroyed. If God is whatever a person worships, then there is only one true God, the entirety of existence itself. Not a deity, not an ideology, not a political movement, but all of life in its full, unfiltered reality. To worship all life is to accept everything, the beauty and the horror, the joy and the suffering, the moments of peace and the moments of despair. It is to recognize that you are not separate from the world, but an inseparable part of it. It is to understand that protecting life, preserving well-being, and moving toward logic and empathy is the only true path to peace. To serve life is to serve God. Unlike false idols, this God cannot be taken from you. Money fades, status disappears, identities shatter, but reality does not care. And when you align yourself with reality instead of delusion, suffering begins to lose its grip. This is the difference between heaven and hell. To fight against life, to demand that reality bend to your will, to reject truth in favor of delusion, this is hell. It is the exhausting battle of someone who refuses to accept what is, to surrender to life, to see it clearly, to let go of false gods and fragile illusions. This is heaven. It is the peace of someone who no longer fears what they cannot control. Religion and the victimhood trap. Throughout history, religions have promised peace, salvation, and purpose, yet they have also been the greatest tool for enslaving the human mind. They do not use physical chains, but psychological ones, subtle manipulations that turn people into willing prisoners of their own suffering. At their core, many belief systems, religious or otherwise, can trap people in a victim mentality when misunderstood. Take Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or modern movements like feminism, social justice, or fat acceptance. Too often they're twisted to point the finger outward, blaming sin, the devil, systemic oppression, or some other villain for suffering. It's not their intent that's the problem. It's how they're used to dodge the harder truth within. By creating a false abuser, these systems ensure that people never look inward for the true source of their suffering. They are conditioned to believe the enemy is always outside themselves, just out of reach, in sinners, in non-believers, in political enemies, in those who oppress them, when in reality, their suffering is self-inflicted. This is not guidance or peace or justice. This is psychological abuse. Instead of encouraging self-awareness, responsibility, and introspection, religion and ideology train people to externalize blame, making them dependent on a savior, a movement, or a higher power to free them. And as long as they believe their suffering is someone else's fault, they will never escape it. Because the truth is, they would rather suffer than be responsible for fixing it. The cycle of self-imposed enslavement. Religion thrives on learned helplessness. It trains people to identify as victims, which creates an endless cycle of dependence. A Christian, convinced that Satan is behind their struggles, prays for divine intervention rather than changing their behaviors. A Catholic, believing that suffering is a test from God, endures abuse instead of walking away. A social justice activist, believing that society is oppressing them, obsesses over external enemies instead of taking action to improve their own life. A fat acceptance activist, blaming diet culture for their misery, rages at society instead of taking care of themselves. In every case, the person remains trapped in suffering, not because of the world around them, but because they refuse to acknowledge the truth. They are the cause of their own misery. Suffering is the easy way out. If suffering is someone else's fault, you get to be angry instead of improving. If you are a victim, you get sympathy instead of responsibility. If the enemy is external, you never have to face your own failures. This is why people choose pain over freedom, because blaming the world is easier than the responsibility of fixing yourself. This is why religion, ideology, and movements that center around victimhood are so dangerous. They make suffering feel righteous. They turn pain into an identity. And once a person believes their suffering makes them morally superior, they will do anything to keep it and begin to virtue signal. They will rage, protest, attack, cry, and demand that the world acknowledge their pain. But they will never take responsibility for it, because to do that would mean admitting the truth. They have always had the power to free themselves. They were simply too afraid to use it. This is the illusion that keeps people enslaved. When someone believes their suffering is caused by an outside force, they surrender their power. They wait for justice instead of creating it. They wait for salvation instead of saving themselves. They waste their life blaming the world instead of transforming their own reality. Religious fanatics, political radicals, and ideological extremists react with rage when their beliefs are questioned. Their entire identity is built upon external blame. They have devoted their lives to the belief that their suffering is someone else's fault. So when reality challenges that belief, they experience a psychological crisis. They would rather destroy reality than admit they were wrong. And when the majority of an entire species is filled with people who refuse to face the truth, it begins its descent into extinction. Chapter 8. The Final Revelation. Your place in the universe. The truth about the apocalypse. Apocalypses do not just happen on a global scale. They happen to individuals, to families, to civilizations. A person who experiences their breaking point has reached their own personal apocalypse. A society that crumbles under its own narcissism, delusion, and trauma has reached its collective apocalypse. And in both cases, there is only one choice left to make. You either choose life, or you choose death. When a person reaches the breaking point, they can either cling to delusion, collapse into resentment, and let suffering consume them, or they can face reality, shield themselves from abuses, burn away the falsehoods, and be reborn into clarity. When a society reaches its breaking point, the same choice is presented. It can continue on the path of denial, narcissism, and self-destruction, tearing itself apart, turning its people against one another, sinking deeper into delusion and chaos. Or it can accept reality and heal itself before it is too late. But make no mistake, apocalypse is inevitable when people refuse to heal. And when a world is full of traumatized narcissistic, adult children who never grew up, who still demand to be rescued, who refuse to take responsibility for their own well-being, the collapse of civilization is unavoidable. When that collapse happens, there is no creator God who will return to cleanse the earth. We do it to ourselves. This was the warning that Jesus was trying to give us, not a prophecy of supernatural destruction, but a psychological truth about what happens when a species refuses to mature. He was not a divine being, but a psychologist and philosopher who specialized in trauma recovery. His teachings were a guide to emotional maturity, a blueprint for how to prevent an apocalypse of the mind and an apocalypse of society. But his words were twisted, weaponized, turned into dogma rather than wisdom. His message was lost. And because of that, humanity has marched itself toward destruction over and over again. Your personal healing determines the fate of society. The only way to stop this cycle is personal healing. Every time an individual chooses self-awareness over delusion, they help stabilize the entire world. Every time someone breaks free from trauma and narcissism, they weaken the sickness that has been passed down through generations. Every person who heals themselves and shares this truth with others is actively preventing the next apocalypse of the self, and by extension, the next apocalypse of society. This is why your choices matter. Because healing is not just about you. Your healing could save the world. The oath. I understand now. No more lies. No more excuses. No more waiting to be saved. I take responsibility for my suffering. I take responsibility for my healing. I refuse to be a slave to my past. I refuse to let pain define me. From this moment forward, I choose clarity over confusion. I choose reality over delusion. I choose to break the cycle. I choose to be free. I vow to honor my well-being and protect it. I vow to stand as a guardian of my consciousness, an angel of God, shielding this world from the demons that would drag it into hell.